Hey guys, Jarretman here, back with another 500 Zoom video, picking up where we left off. Five six off, we'll call half the time here. We're gonna have some mixed calls in the big blind, which might seem a little confusing. Confusing in the sense of, either it's a profitable call or it's not. But basically, if we have a mixed call, so we're gonna fold half the time and call half the time, it means that the call is 0 EV theoretically, or at least that's what the solver that generated those ranges, it thinks that it's a 0 EV call. So if you call it, if you fold it, it's going to be the same EV. Which again is confusing because then you're like, well, couldn't you just fold it all the time, or couldn't you just call it all the time? And the answer is that if you do that, then it changes your overall range composition. In which case, if you called it all the time, then it wouldn't be a 0 EV call anymore because you would have too much of the bad hand in your range. Pocket sevens, small blind versus hijack. I think we can just fold it. It's kind of close. We're playing small blind as, a 3-better fold. So when you're playing it as a 3-better fold, you have to play pretty tight, actually. So yeah, for example, if we always called 5-6 offsuit and 7-6 offsuit and 8-7 offsuit and 9-8 offsuit, that would mean that our overall range becomes very weak. And therefore, calling with those hands might no longer be 0 EV. It might be slightly minus EV because our weak range just... 7-2 suited, we can fold. Our weak range can't handle having all of those hands in there, and it pushes them from a 0 EV call to a minus EV call. Table 2 is a board where a larger size makes sense at equilibrium. Our overpairs do better than him on this board, and he would 3-bet a lot of the overpairs. Sorry, our overpairs are doing well on this board, is what I meant to say. Not better than him, because he doesn't really have any overpairs except for 9s. Even 10s he can have sometimes. Table 2, we can call 9s on the button here versus cutoff. Again, I've said this in a lot of my videos, but I'll say it again here. You can play the button versus cutoff as a 3-better fold. I think that's totally fine. Jack 4 off, we might even mix like a small percentage of raise versus the small blind limp. We include some of these, junky hands in our ISO raising range. When we are playing the limp pot versus the small blind, I think just overall despite being in position, we're in a bad spot on almost every texture. We'll do a low percentage 3-bet here with the pocket 3s, and we actually get the 3-bet. Gonna value check back my jack high on table 1. I feel like 10-6 off is a loose limp. I know you get to play more hands as the small blind, but I feel like that hand is a little bit too loose. And we'll fold our pocket 3s versus the larger 4-bet size. Again, Jack 10 suited, this is the hand if you were playing the button as a mixed spot versus the cutoff with some calls, some 3-bets, then Jack 10 suited would be a call at least half the time, I think. Now this is interesting versus the 4-bet, the cold 4-bet. I think we have to fold just given how this hand performs versus a cold 4-betting range that consists mostly of queens plus ace king. And then hands like ace jack suited, ace queen off, ace queen suited, king queen suited, maybe a little bit of king jack suited. If you think about his actual range, Jack 10 does not perform very well versus that range. Even though it's a very pretty looking hand. Table 2 with our entire range, we're going to be mostly checking this turn. Like a very, very high frequency checking spot. If you wanted to just overbet or check, that would be reasonable. And I think King 2 could potentially overbet some of the time. Easy fold after we check though on table 2 versus that size. It's kind of an interesting size, to be honest. I'm still gonna fold. This turn spot is tough to play as the big blind. It's tough to play it properly because you have to balance a range on the turn that's going to be mostly checks. So you want to have some traps in there to protect your range, and also to have the ability to check raise him and get more money in the pot. This is a weird spot on table 1. We're gonna bluff lead some flush rivers, so I think we can call here. I don't think we can bluff lead this river though. We can check raise though. I don't think he shows up with Jack 10 that much. Yeah, I kind of like the check raise. He's repping. I just hope he didn't river pocket queens, because he doesn't have 10-7 suited. He doesn't have 7-5 suited. He's repping like. Could even jam this river. I'm just gonna go for the normal raise though. If we did have a hand like a straight, we might want to jam too. It's kind of close. I'll just go for the normal size check raise though. He's ripping a hand like aces, kings that check back the flop, or even, you know, like 10s, jacks that could also check back the flop, or queens. And then on the turn versus the 1/3 bet, they can raise. He can also even have a hand like ace-9 suited, or 9x in general. Because versus the 1/3, they can raise for, you know, value / protection. I think the interesting part in this hand is the river sizing. I think, okay, we get a call on table 1. I think, given our straight advantage, like even I think we have a Jack 10 advantage, as I think a lot of his Jack 10 don't find that raise for that size on the turn. I think a jam might have made more sense on the river, especially if that's the sizing I'm going to end up using with my straights mostly. And then a lot of the hands that would want to only raise to that size, like maybe not jam. For example, if I had a hand like a set, those hands from me would have 3-bet the turn mostly. So on the river, I'm basically saying I have a straight or a bluff. I guess I can have a hand like queen 6 suited, queen 8 suited, queen 9 suited, and those hands don't want to jam. Those hands might want to raise for that normal size. But mostly, I think I just want to jam, or, yeah, jam or fold. Jam, fold, or call, obviously. We're going to have a calling range. Table 1, I'm going to make the nitty check back. We chop with every other ace. We only get called by better if we bet, so. Like, it might be a spot where we could turn an ace-x hand into a bluff, as most of his range is also ace-x, just to make him indifferent. But I think he has more queen x than we do in that spot, considering we check back the flop. So yeah, bottom line, I think a jam might have made more sense there. Because when I raise to that size, I'm only repping like queen 9, and that's kind of thin. I think if someone's paying attention, I get hero called there a lot when I just raise to that size. Table 2 is close here. Without the 7 of spades, I think this hand might even want to check back a lot despite the king high board texture. We can raise our pocket 8 some of the time here. I'll go for the call. Yeah, we're going to fold. I was just thinking with the pocket 8s, do we want to raise more or less when we have the 8 of diamonds? Considering that when we don't have the 8 of diamonds, we can turn an 8. We can turn the 8 of diamonds. We have a pure call, I think, on table 1, considering he bet 1/4 on the flop. And how wide our range is going to be. We're going to have to call like some ace highs, every king, obviously. A lot of flush draws. Interesting he doesn't find the bluff on the river with that queen 9. He blocks my king X. King 9 off, king 9 suited, king queen off, and king queen suited. I mean, king queen suited will be mostly 3-betting, but... So he blocks my king X. He doesn't block any of my flush draws. He doesn't block... He really doesn't block any of like my low pairs. I feel like if there is like a perfect combo to bluff on the river, this is this combo, because it has almost no showdown value as well. I guess it has a little bit of showdown value versus my weaker flush draws. You know, king high textures still make a decent candidate to bet 1/3 with range, but on this texture, I think the solver is going to end up checking it back a decent amount. We turn the very weak flush draw on a turn card where he can have basically all the queen 10. We roll our high number, but I just like checking back here. If we bet and get raised, we have to fold, which kind of sucks. So if that's the case, I think I'm choosing either a stronger or weaker hand to bet the turn, if that makes sense. Like a hand like ace 5 of spades can call versus the check raise if it's reasonably sized. And now on the river with 5 high, I think if we're just going to choose our bluffs, like logically, I think this hand makes a fine bluff. He could have 7-8 even. And we could check back and lose to 7-8. That would be kind of a disaster. I don't know. That logic's probably not correct. We just have, you know, it can never be that bad of a decision to bluff with the nut low. Like, you're playing the board here with 4-5. There's no way bluffing it can be that bad in this spot. Like if we had 5-4 of hearts, obviously it would be a better bluff, because with 5-4 of spades, we're blocking hands that could float the flop. Like 7-5 of spades, or ace-5 of spades, ace-4 of spades that didn't 3-bet pre-flop. And we're blocking hands that could fold the river, like pocket 4s, pocket 5s. So our blockers aren't that great. I like betting some of the time here, considering we have the backdoor flush draw. I like betting some of our 4x. I would rather bet a hand like 4-3 of diamonds or 4-6 of diamonds, just needing slightly more protection and also having slightly more playability on more turns than this hand does. I'm just wondering if overbetting with this hand ever makes sense on table 1. I mean, there's no way it could be bad, considering that we can get called by worse and make better fold when we overbet the turn, but I think it makes a nice check back as well. I don't think we check back too many flush draws on the turn. At least we're not perceived to as well. So this might be a good bluff raising candidate for him. A good spot, I mean, where he could find a lot of bluff raises. So I was just thinking I didn't really want to discourage those bluff raises by overbetting. However, obviously in a spot where we can have the nuts, where we can have flushes, it's going to make sense to have overbets on this river. Not to mention, I think we could potentially overbet thinner than a flush. If we are going to overbet, I mean, this hand obviously could fit into that category. It's nice to include some flushes in the normal size betting category as well some of the time, because we have a lot of hands that want to bet that can't bet for the overbet, if that makes sense. Jack 9 deuce, this is a good candidate to just bet 1/3 with your range. You could even mix in some big bets here. Overall, it's a much better board for the button. And these like complete no equity hands can even find some overbets on the turn some of the time. He doesn't improve, especially this turn. Like the 5 doesn't improve barely any of his hands. Like it just improves Jack 5 suited and 9/5 suited, which we can have as well. It doesn't improve any of his off combos. This hand looks a little spew, and it probably is a little bit spew, but I'm going to fire the river. He can have a lot of pair plus flush draws, like 5x of spades. Jack X of spades are probably getting called down, but he can have a lot of 9x. He can have a lot of Jack X still. We can easily bet King Jack or Ace Jack, I guess, would be the bottom here. And when we go for the normal bet on the river, okay, he has a Jack. When we go for the normal bet on the river, I guess we're saying that we don't really have the nutted portion of our range that often. We're more repping a hand like I said, Ace Jack, King Jack, pocket queens, pocket kings, pocket aces, which I think is totally fine. We want to be able to bet those hands for the normal bet on the river. Once I do get to the river with this type of garbage, no equity hand, I think bluffing it is good in this spot especially. But when we're on the turn, that's where this hand might have been a little bit spew. I'm not sure exactly if we ever need to bluff these pure no equity hands. I think it's fine though. Table 1, I think we can fold versus this check raise. It's kind of close though. Yeah, okay, we'll make the fold. Yeah, so if there was a part of this hand that was spew, it's definitely the turn. Usually the spots where we want to bet with no equity type hands is when we can get check raised a lot on the turn, and then therefore some of our medium equity bluffs can have their equity denied when he check raises us. I'm just thinking if this is one of those spots, and I don't think we get check raised very often on the turn, so maybe we don't need to include any of these no equity hands at all. This is an interesting spot on table 2. And yeah, in the replay, if we don't need to include any of these no equity hands, then we should just check the turn and look to bluff rivers potentially. I'm gonna try to get called by ace 10, ace queen, ace x of diamonds. Okay, yeah. I don't think we can fold king queen here. Do I think this ever gets bluff raised enough? Maybe not. Just having the king blocker is too strong. Oh, and he could have that, I guess. Another option for this hand here would be to use a larger bet size on the river, which I think is fine. He is very capped. The strongest hand I guess he can have would be 6-3 of spades or ace-3 of spades. Ace-3 of spades would have 3-bet a decent amount of the time pre-flop and would have check-raised the flop as well some of the time. Otherwise, his strongest hands are just Jack-5 suited, set that didn't raise the flop, like pocket twos, which didn't raise the flop, which is very unlikely. 5-4 of spades. So overall, his range is pretty capped. And if that's the case, we can definitely go for a larger than normal bet on the river. I think we definitely want to have both in this spot on the river. We want to have a normal bet because we have some hands that just aren't strong enough to overbet. And then we have some hands that really do want to overbet. Like, for example, if we do have a hand like pocket twos or even Jack-9 suited, I think those hands are definitely strong enough to overbet the river. Yeah, I'm not that happy with the way I played that hand. Results aside, I'm not too happy with the way I played that hand. I think maybe an overbet just performs a lot better on the river. Either a jam or an overbet. I think we have to hero 5 some of the time on table 2. Table 1's a bit of a weird board. I think a 1/3 with range strategy here is a little bit lazy and definitely suboptimal. The big blind has way more 4x than we do. Also, he has a bit more interaction around the 4-5 than we do, having 7-6 off where we don't have 7-6 off. And then on this turn, when we have the 10-7 versus the overbet, I think we don't have to do anything here. The hands, like, first of all, we're not going to be raising very much, if at all, versus the overbet on the turn. And the hands that do want to do that, I think, revolve more around having a 6 or a pair on the board. And we'll go for the check on table 2. We can check call, we can check raise. It's not that thin to check raise. Versus that size, we're definitely going to go for the check raise. Ace queen suited here doesn't really like 4-betting that much. Cutoff versus button or hijack versus button, because if we 4-bet and he jams, we have to fold, which is kind of dirty when we have ace queen suited. And this is kind of interesting on both tables here. Versus the size, I'm tempted to just fold, expecting too much ace king as his bluffs and not enough of hands that we beat, even with the backdoor flush draw. Even though this is not a fold, I'm going to fold on table 1. And I'm going to bet 1/3 on table 2, just targeting his ace queen, ace jack, ace king region. Another option, obviously, is to check call. What you do in the spot on the river in practice, I think, should revolve around whether you think the person is more likely to bluff when you check to them or more likely to have a weaker 1-pair type hand and call when you bet. And versus that huge size, I think we have enough 10x We have enough 10x to not worry about being protected even when we bet 1/3 on the river. So I think I'm going to make the easy fold. We'll check back our ace jack on table 1. These stronger ace highs have decent check back properties because when he has a hand like ace 10 and the turn is an ace, it's kind of nice for us. We'll check back again. Six nine off is not quite strong enough to continue. Again, table 2, this is a board where a larger bet makes more sense. He has a lot of medium equity hands and all of the super high equity hands we have as well. Like even threes at some frequency we have. You know, like he has a lot of hands like that. Sorry, let me restart that sentence. That was a bad sentence. He has a lot of hands that are straight draws or weak pairs or weak flush draws, you know, very weak straight draws. A lot of hands that have a very comfortable time versus the 1/3 sizing, but have a bit of a tougher time, at least theory-wise, versus the larger sizing, which is why you'll see a larger size being chosen here. However, again, I think I've said this lots of times before, I think it is more difficult for a human to play versus the 1/3 size, even on this board. This looks like a misclick on table 1. So I'm just wondering, is it more likely to be a call misclick or more likely to be a 3-bet misclick? I'm not going to worry about it too much. I'm just going to play straightforward. You can even pretend it's not a misclick. The king of diamonds is nice to include in our betting range most of the time here, I think. We will have a considerable checking range, like at least 30% of the time I think we'll be checking. But overall, mostly betting. And when we have the king of diamonds, I think it wants to bet slightly more. And we'll check back on table 1. We roll our super low number on table 2. Overall, our range is going to be checking a lot on this turn, despite it being maybe a good looking turn for the 3-better, just because we're betting so frequently for the 1/3 size on the flop that we just have a lot of hands that can't bet this turn. And versus the 1/3 size, we can even call with our king jack offsuit, which is what I think I'm going to do. Just wondering if bluff jamming diamond rivers is ever a thing here. It probably is, but not that much. Yeah, not a thing when he has ace-x of diamonds and we're basically drawing dead on the turn. Like our hand is close versus the 1/3 bet, but the reason that we can call versus the 1/3 bet is we actually have showdown value. Like if he has a hand, if he has 6-7, 7-8, hands like that. Jack 10, other random diamond hands like Jack 8 of diamonds. Table 1, we'll do a low frequency check back here. Otherwise, just gonna bet for the normal size. Not that low frequency. I was gonna say like 10% of the time we'll check back our queen jack here. Pocket sixes is close. So you could, I've seen, you know, again, I've seen sims that pure open it. I've seen sims that half open it. I've seen sims that open it a little bit of the time. If you're going to be opening the lower pairs as well at some frequency, then you tend to not be able to open pocket sixes at full frequency. Now we can overbet if we want to on table 1, and that's what I'm going to do. He's relatively capped. He can still have some queen jack traps, but he's pretty capped. This is another spot where having multiple river sizes makes sense and I think is needed. I think in most spots you're going to end up with multiple river sizings being needed. And that can get really complicated. It can get difficult, especially when you start looking at which hands you want to be bluffing for which sizings at which frequency. The 9-3 suited, we can 3-bet, we can call. Low frequency 3-bet. We'll open the queen 8 offsuit here, but not going to do anything versus the button. So yeah, let's take this hand for example. So we're on the river and we have a hand like queen 8 of diamonds, let's say. So we're pretty sure that we're gonna bluff it. In fact, let's say we know it's a pure bluff. And now we just have to decide, which sizing do we bluff it for? Do we want to be bluffing it only for the overbet size? Do we want to use other hands to bluff for the normal size? Do we want to split it between bluffing it sometimes for the normal size, sometimes overbetting? Table 2, this is a bad spot, but we have to call after we 4-bet because he has all the ace-king. I think that's a very fair result. The best hand won. We had a pair, he had ace high. I wish it was always like that. So this hand here, queen 8 suited, yeah, we could bluff it for both sizes, but then it's like, what frequency do you bluff it for the large size? What frequency do you bluff it for the smaller size? Which hands are you bluffing in the smaller size only? Which hands are you bluffing in the overbet size only? Which hands would we rather block? Which portion of his range would we rather block when we're overbetting compared to which portion of his range would we rather block when we're betting small? It gets complicated really quick, and it's one of the more difficult things about Texas Hold'em, I'd say. It's very, very easy to end up unbalanced and bluffing too much with one size and not value betting enough with one size. We can check raise like a very small percentage of the time. Mostly just want to call with king jack here though. Queen jack suited. It's nice to be deeper. In position calling a 3-bet. In general, it's nice to be deeper. Queen jack suited, I wouldn't say is necessarily a better hand for playing deeper, but any hand is better when you're in position. So interesting board here, 200 big blinds deep. I'm going to start with the small bet, actually. We can call a raise, I think. If he goes super large, I don't think we can call a raise, but... So it's interesting, 200 big blinds deep, because we have all the sets, and I don't think he has any. I don't think he would 3-bet 9s, 8s being 200 big blinds deep. And now I think we want to go polar. On the turn here on table 2. We're saying we have a set or 2 pair when we bet this turn. We're no longer betting for protection. We're no longer betting to try to get him to fold overcards. We're betting because we have a very strong hand. I think we can fold 2s, no diamond. I don't know. And yeah, we have nothing to do but jam on table 2. I mean, with the nuts, obviously. The ace is a bit of an interesting card. It looks like it's not a brick, but it's actually a brick. It might be bad for me in the sense that maybe he now folds the hands like pocket kings. Because if I was bluffing with a hand like ace x of clubs, now on the river I don't need to bluff. Or it's a really good card when he has pocket aces. That's just a really unfortunate river card for him. Because obviously now he's beating all of my sets, which I would take the same line. The flop, I think, is the most interesting part of the hand, being 200 big blinds deep in these positions. I think that the turn and the river kind of just play themselves. Excuse me, one sec. I wish I had a button to mute my microphone or something more professional than just sneezing off camera. Yeah, this flop is very interesting. He doesn't have nines, he doesn't have eights, he doesn't have twos. We're 200 big blinds deep, so him having an overpair advantage is less important. We'll go for the check raise on table one. So I like his decision to check the flop. I like it a lot, actually. I think he should be checking the flop at a decent frequency here. And then when I bet 1/3, he has another interesting decision point with pocket aces here. At 100 big blinds deep, he's very happy to just check raise the flop if he does decide to check and get it in. But at 200 big blinds deep, he's less happy about doing it. However, I think aces gets check raised some of the time on the flop here. But check calling, I think, happens more often than check raising. So he check calls. The turn is the offsuit 10. And then on the turn, I think the hand gets kind of standard. So he checks, and I overbet. And I think he's got a mixed decision with pocket aces here. I think he's leaning towards mostly calling, sometimes folding. I don't think protection jamming is a thing here ever versus that size with that much SPR remaining. We have a double gut shot now on table 2, so we'll continue. Yeah, I don't think protection jamming with aces or any overpair is ever a thing here. We're repping super polar when we bet this size. We're saying we have a straight, a set, or maybe 2 pair. Or like a really good combo draw, I guess. We're gonna jam on table 2. Another option for that hand is to like bet 1/4 on the river because he's repping the polar range that is now going to be check overfolding. So like a small bet on the river can make some sense, especially when we want to bluff with like missed diamonds or some sort of straight draw that we had, like ace jack of hearts or something. We roll a 3-bet with the 5-7 suited, very low frequency 3-bet here. Okay, so he calls the turn, pretty standard, and then on the river it just plays itself, obviously. The two decision points in the hand, I think, are whether or not to check raise the flop and at what frequency, and whether he should ever fold the turn. Otherwise, it's just a mega cooler. The flop is cool. The flop is cool for my range. I have a rather large nut advantage, and I'm in position. I think this is a great flop, and being 200 big blinds deep, a 1/3 bet is pretty effective because he's not very comfortable check raising very frequently. Whereas if you're 100 big blinds deep, you have to be a little bit careful betting too much on the flop, as he can very comfortably check raise, get it in with all of his overpairs. Even a hand like ace-9 suited, if he has it, can check raise, get it in. So yeah, kind of cool hand. Table 2, being out of position to the cold caller kind of sucks when we have a hand like pocket sixes. We'll call 25% of the time here. Okay, we get a call. Like hijack versus small blind sixes would call maybe like half the time or a small percentage of the time. But when we have the cold caller behind us, we're very often going to get a call behind as well, and then we have to play out of position versus this player, even though we're in position versus the small blind 3-better. Table 1, we're going to go for a check. It's a board you can do a lot of different things on. You can bet big, you can bet small, you can check. On these boards that are extremely good for you, you can usually do a lot of different things. The turn now, we just have two things we can do. We can bet small or we can check, I think. Doesn't make too much sense to do anything else. This spot is a cool spot to, when you're the big blind and you face the small bet on the turn, your opponent isn't completely capped because he can have some traps that will take this line, specifically pocket aces, pocket queens, because he wants to encourage calls from you. But otherwise, it's a cool spot to make sure you have enough raises on the turn as the big blind, as the 6 does improve a lot of your hands, like queen 6 suited, 5-6 offsuit, ace 6 offsuit, ace 6 suited, pocket sixes. Interesting board here on table 1. I think with the backdoor flush draw, we want to end up betting more often than we do checking, but we get a low number, and again, ace king does make a nice check hand on these textures. Just wondering if we ever start turning ace king into a bluff. Or start betting with it, I should say. On turns and rivers. I think the answer is some of the time. He probably had a hand like ace queen or ace 10. Or king queen. Which, again, is another reason why ace king makes such a good check. Let's say the river was a king. I get paid extra compared to I would have just bet the flop and he folded. We're going to go for the check on table 2. I think it's a board if you wanted to, you could just bet 1/3 with your range. But the way I'm going to play this board is bet 1/3 or check. And this hand can check call, it can check raise, it can do a lot of different things. And we get our low number again. It's on a turn card that I would say favors the button, especially after flop goes check, check. And it's a turn card where I think he might start turning some no equity hands into a bluff, potentially. And on the river, I'm going to go for the check raise. I get my low number. I like check raising here, to be honest. Ace king off, have to call after we face the 5-bet jam. Our range is mostly like ace king heavy here on table 2. So I'm just thinking, like, does he ever value bet thin with a pair that might be more inclined to value bet thin than it would be to call a bet? And I think the answer is yes. And I'm wondering what size I want to go for on the river here. And I think not a jam makes sense. We're capped, but so is he. So we're not really capped. And the thinnest that we can check raise for value on the river would be a hand like queen 10 suited that went check, check and decided to check the river. I understand I played that hand kind of weird, but I think it's fine as long as I'm using the proper frequencies. Which I'm probably not, but whatever. If we were to play a small blind calling range, these are the types of hands that would make it into the small blind calling range. The mid to low pairs. 7-9 off, you could mix in some 3-bets with as well. So with 7-9 no diamond, I think we want to check back mostly. Needing slightly less protection than a hand like 7-5, for example, because if he has a hand like Jack-9 offsuit, the 9 we don't need protection against. I think we can bet small with range on table 2. I think GTO-wise, 3 ways, we should have some checkbacks on such a locked down board, but betting very small for your range I think works out pretty well. And we'll check back again. And we're going to value bet this river if check 2. I think we can raise even. After he bets 1/4. Yeah, I think we can go for the raise with basically any 7x here. I don't know, I could be wrong. Even if I am wrong, I am gonna go for the value raise. I don't understand what's happening on table 2. Obviously, we're not folding. I'm expecting him to have a 7, I guess. Now I'm considering turning my ace-queen into a bluff. If he had bet small, do I jam this hand here? Just repping ace-king? I think we have a pretty clear check back on table 2. I don't think there's any value in betting when the flush completes. Oh, he does have ace-10, okay. Interesting. Interesting. I still like checking back the river. If the flush doesn't complete, or even if the club flush completes, if this was the 3 of clubs, I think I would bet. If this was just a brick 3, like the 3 of hearts, I would bet. But on the 3 of spades, I'm finding it tough to get called by even a worse ace here. I mean, we are protected because we have ace-king and he doesn't, so we don't have to worry too much about getting check raised as a bluff that often, I don't think. So maybe it was a little nitty to check it back, but I still like it. I still think even a hand like this is going to find a fold. Maybe in that case I should bet like 1/3 on the river. Just going really greedy. If we're protected and we expect not to get check raised very much as a bluff, I mean, then maybe a 1/3 bet on the river does make sense. Let me see how long we've been going for here. Okay, we'll go for a bit more. Mix in some 3-bets with the ace-3 off. Big blind versus small blind, otherwise we will be calling. Ace-10 off can 3-bet versus the button. It can also fold. I'm gonna 3-bet it like 25% of the time. I think a good way to decide that is to look at how often the button is 4-betting versus a small blind 3-bet and how often they are calling versus a small blind 3-bet. The problem, of course, being that to get those numbers, you need a very large sample. Excuse me. So yeah, just having a solid baseline of knowing what to do, I think is going to be better. I don't think we need to continue the ace-3 off versus that size on the turn. We will need to continue some ace highs, but I think it's the stronger ones are just objectively better calls. And on table 2, this hand obviously benefits a lot from protection on the flop. And it's kind of nice as if you consider this more as a bluff than as a protection betting hand, even though it accomplishes both. Because hitting the 5 of spades on the turn is very nice, or just, you know, hitting a 5 in general. So the hands that do want to bet for us, I think, are these low pairs. If you want to consider it a bluff or a value bet, you can consider it a bluff, I guess. I think a larger size makes more sense GTO-wise on table 1. But the small size performs well, I think. And now on the turn, I was going to say, yeah, we'll bet some of the time. It's nice to include some hands that aren't a spade at low frequency when you're bluffing turns. Because when the river is a spade, you need some hands to bluff. And if you only bet spade hands on the turn, then you have to start turning some pairs into bluffs that might want to check. And now on the river, oh, we get our high number. Okay. We'll go for the small bet again, just targeting like his 8x or queen x hands, or potentially his like 1 spade hands, like if he has jack 10 offsuit with the 10 of spades, for example. Great board for us, table 2. We can start by betting 1/3 with range. You can start by betting 1/4 with range. I think on this board you could probably even bet half pot with range and be completely okay with it. King jack off, I'm going to 3-bet some of the time and fold the rest. Not going to do any calls versus button as cutoff there with king jack off. So things get kind of interesting when you're 200 big blinds deep, blind versus blind. On one hand, you could make the argument for 3-betting more as the big blind, as you get to call more versus 4-bets. The SPR in the 3-bet pot is going to be much larger. However, you can make the argument that perhaps calling more and 3-betting less makes more sense because in that case, the single raise pot, the SPR, is even higher, and it's even more difficult to play. You get to put them in even more tough spots. So whether you should shift your range to 3-betting more compared to calling, or if you should shift your range calling compared to 3-betting, I don't know. It's a interesting spot for sure, and I have no idea what the proper thing to do is. We'll go for the check on table 2. And we have an easy fold on table 1. We're not going to do much folding versus the 1/3 size on this board, but the hands that will fold are going to be hands like this. If we had even the jack of clubs, we could maybe do something. But with no club, it's a pretty easy fold. Going to be mostly calling with 10s. If you wanted to pure call with 10s here, I think that would be fine. I'm going to 4-bet 25% of the time. Okay, we get a rare 4-bet with 10s here. Maybe we'll want to flip versus ace-king again, because we have to call if he jams. Ace-5 suited, actually just going to call. Button versus small blind. We can use other hands as a 4-bet bluff, like ace-6 suited, ace-7 suited we can use as a 4-bet bluff some of the time. Getting the fold is actually kind of nice with 10s there. I think getting the call is fine too, but the fold is maybe even preferred. And versus half pot, do we need to float ace 5 here? I think the answer is no. I'm going to check this one later. I know what to do versus 75%, and I know what to do versus 1/3 on this texture, but versus half, this is one of the hands where I don't know what to do. Versus 75%, it's an easy fold, and versus 1/3, it's a call, but I think versus half... That's interesting. I'm going to check that one out later. So this board, we will have a check back range. I'm not going to be betting my range on this board, because we opened out of the gun and we don't have king 5 suited, king 2 suited, 2s or 5s at full frequency, where he has all of those hands. He actually has a slight nut advantage despite us having kings and him not. But king 9 of hearts is just so strong, I think we don't need to mix that into our check back range. Our hand is strong enough even to 3-bet, to be honest. But I don't think we do much 3-betting on this board considering his nut advantage, what I was just talking about. So I'll just make the call. I hope he has a hand like ace jack of hearts or something like that. And now when he checks the turn, this is getting kind of interesting. I'm tempted to go for the small bet here to greedily charge all of his flush draw hands that are drawing dead. Like if he has 7-9 of hearts, he's drawing dead. Oh, sorry, not 7-9 of hearts. 7-6 of hearts, he's drawing dead, which is obviously good for me. He doesn't check raise king jack on the flop much. And then the hands that he wants to double check raise the turn with, I guess, are the same hands he wants to check raise the flop with. He never has like a turned 2 pair. He's saying he has king 5, king 2, or 5s or 2s. And we get a check back on table 2. And we can't fold. We can't fold yet on table 1. And then the hands he's going to bluff check raise with on the turn are going to be hands that picked up equity, like maybe a hand like queen 10 of spades that check raised the flop now can sometimes check raise the turn, sometimes bet the turn. Seems like overall a good card for him. I feel like I'm going to check and lose. I'm going to check and lose versus king 5 is my guess, because king 5 is too thin to bet the river. But I think we still have to check. I don't think it makes any sense to bluff this. Yeah, okay. I still think we have other hands that can bluff. We have ace 10 of hearts, ace queen of hearts still that decides to bet the turn. Turning this one into a bluff didn't make that much sense to me, even though I think he always has a hand like king 2 or king 5. Yeah, bit of an annoying hand. Would we even want to bet king jack on this river? I don't think so. We're basically saying we have a flush. In fact, that's all we're saying we have. A flush or pocket kings. I think pocket jacks might bet fold the flop if it bets and mostly check back the flop. Ace 3 off is close. I think I'm going to fold it sometimes versus 2.5. I don't want to call it all the time. And I'm going to wrap up this video. It's been just over an hour, so that seems like a good time for this video. So I'll play these last two hands. I'll play both of them versus the same guy. I think we do want to bet some of our aces some of the time for the small size on the river, because we want to bluff with a hand like queen jack some of the time on the river. So it's nice to balance both of those in there. Okay, that's it for this video. That's it for this video, guys. I will see you in the next one. Take care.